If you've ever thought about writing romance, you have come to the right place. I am Savannah Carlisle. I write heartwarming romance novels with idyllic beach settings. My stories transport readers to fun and quirky small towns where friends feel like family. And in my other life, my real name is Kristi Dosh. I write about something completely different in that part of my life, the business of college sports. And because I have nonfiction books out under my real name, I write my romance under a pen name, but as you can see, no secret, I freely admit that I have these two very different sides of my life. In case you haven't already heard about this distinction of plotters versus pantsers, I wanted to give you a quick reminder before I tell you which one I am and how I plan out my novels. Well, I've probably given it away now by saying that I plan. So, a plotter is a writer who plans their story in advance. This can look like outlining major plot points, character arcs, and key scenes before you even begin drafting. No surprise, I am in that camp. And then you have pantsers, a writer who discovers the story as they go, drafting without a detailed outline and letting the characters' voice and intuition shape the plot in real time. I would say that I'm really something in between this. People sometimes talk about a plotzer or some other combination of these names. As you're going to see, I do a lot of planning. However, when I start writing, particularly when I get towards the middle, I often find myself veering off my course, and I let myself do that. If my characters have taken me to a different place, then I stop and I rework the rest of my sort of outline and planning to fit the direction we're now going in. But I'm going to show you how I plan out my books before I start. I generally write 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I recognize this is on the faster end of drafting, but that is because of how much time and effort I put into my planning. Let's start first with what every romance needs, because romance readers don't just want love, they want to watch these two people earn it. So every romance novel needs a central love story. A romantic relationship must be the main plot, not a subplot, if we're going to shelve it as a romance. It also needs emotional stakes. Something real has to be at risk if they don't end up together. You can incorporate things like fear and past wounds and external pressures. We're going to talk about that more. There also needs to be some internal and external conflict. Obstacles should come up from within the characters and the world around them. But we need our characters to grow. At least one, ideally both of the characters, must change in order for their relationship to work. Readers want chemistry and tension. They want the push-pull and the longing and the unresolved feelings. That's what's going to keep them turning the pages. And then at the end, we need a happily ever after, or at least a happy for now. This is absolutely essential. You cannot call your book a romance if it does not have a happily ever after or a happy for now. So I want to share with you my process of writing a romance. And we're going to break down each of these. So I start with brainstorming. I work on my character profiles and I work on goal, motivation, and conflict for each character. Then I start breaking things down into a beat sheet. I actually write a rough draft of my synopsis and then I do a little bit of a chapter breakdown before I ever start writing the book. So let's dig into what this looks like. So, in the first sort of phase of my brainstorming, this really just looks like a note on my phone. When I get an initial idea for a story, I just start jotting myself notes in my phone. And some of the things I'm starting to jot down are things like the setting, maybe some of the tropes that we're going to have. And then I start jotting down notes about my female main character and my male main character. How did he or she get here? Both like physically here, why do they live in this place? But how did they emotionally get here? Where we start the story? What has happened? What is their backstory that's gotten them here? And then how does their past shape their worldview and their view of love? That can be from their upbringing, their relationship with their parents, their relationship with siblings, maybe past romantic relationships that they've had. I'll jot down too if I have distinct ideas about their physical characteristics. I tend to cast actors and actresses, particularly Hallmark actors and actresses, in my roles as I'm thinking of these characters, and that really helps me visualize them while I'm writing. I'm also going to jot down anything I might know about their career or their living situation. Do they have a job right now? What is it? How did they get there? Do they love their job? Do they hate their job? Is there something else they wish they were doing? For living situation, are they living on their own? Do they live with parents? Do they live with children? Do they have a roommate? That sort of thing. So all of this is just like random bullet points in a note on my phone at this point. Once it really starts shaping and I'm like, okay, there's a story here. This has legs. I think I could write a whole book around this. Not every note gets to that point. But when it gets to that point and I feel like I have all the things that I need, then I'll actually sit down and write out a character profile for each of these characters. There's a bunch of different templates for that online. I've started some of those templates. They're not always a good fit for me, so I sort of do my own. I've got their physical characteristics listed, their backstory, their career, that kind of stuff. Just what I need to remember as I start writing the book, because often I'm promoting a book that just came out while I'm trying to write a new book. And every once in a while, I've been really crazy and tried to write two books at one time. So having those character profiles is really helpful for keeping me on track, reminding me what color eyes the female main character has, that sort of thing. The next part of my brainstorming process is to sit down and think through goal, motivation, and conflict for each character. You can find all kinds of stuff about goal, motivation, and conflict online and in books that have been written. This is not something that I coined, but what you want to do is sit down and do this for each character, even if you're not going to do dual POV, which I've written all but one of my books is dual POV. This is especially helpful for dual POV, but even if you're not writing dual POV, I still think you need to go through this process of thinking about the GMC for each of your main characters. So for goal, you're going to ask yourself, what does your character want right now? It needs to be something tangible and specific, something that we can actually see them pursuing. And then they need motivation. Why do they want this thing? What is the emotional reason that is driving them? And this is often rooted in their backstory that you've already come up with, or at least in my process that I've already come up with. And then conflict. What is standing in their way? What are their internal fears? Plus, what are their external obstacles, including potentially and usually the other love interest? Each character needs to have their own GMC, and those goals should create at least a little friction. You don't want them to align too easily, or they're not going to earn this relationship that they're going to get in the end. The romance only works because they can't get what they want without changing. So my most recent book that was released was called Where We Belong. And in this book, Chloe, my female main character, her goal was to expand her small town cafe by getting cast on a reality TV show for entrepreneurs, where at the end she would earn enough money to expand her cafe. And her motivation is that she wants to prove that she's more than just her big brother's little sister. Her big brother is a former professional baseball player. He helped give her the money to start her cafe, and everybody in her little town sort of refers to the cafe as her and her brother's, when in reality, other than the startup money, he has nothing to do with the business. She has successfully grown this business on her own, but she's always in her brother's shadow. Nobody gives her any credit. So her motivation for going on this reality show and winning is not just to expand her cafe, but really to prove to everybody that she has been successful on her own. Her conflict is that once she's cast, she's not doing well in her initial competitions because everybody else is approaching it from a more textbook sort of business approach. There are some other people with MBAs and just more complex business experience than she has, and they're approaching it in more traditional ways in terms of their business plans and their financial outlooks and just everything. She is a little more fly by your seat of your pants. She's been very successful because she has a very community driven approach, and some of the things she does doesn't always don't always make sense on a profit and loss statement. So she's struggling in the competitions in this reality show because she isn't approaching it like everyone else, and the judges aren't really connecting with her. Michael, her love interest, his goal is to close a profitable real estate deal in a big city nearby. He lives in the small town where she is, at least he lives there part time, and he's trying to close a real estate deal for a building in the downtown of the nearby big city. His motivation is that financial success gives him security and control, but his conflict is that he hasn't been able to earn buy-in from the community. They do not trust him. They see him as the big bad developer, and he has to figure out how to trust them. Now, I don't know if you can tell from this already or not, but they each sort of have what the other one needs. He needs to learn more about the way that she operates her business with a very community-driven focus, and the things she does that don't necessarily follow what a textbook would tell you to do if you were starting or growing a business. And she needs a little bit more of his MBA and his sense of business to be able to represent herself well on this reality show. So they essentially start helping each other with these business goals they have. This book is actually part of a series, so these people have already had sort of a friendship before this book starts, and we've seen them in some of the previous books. But this book sort of digs into parts of their businesses and their personalities that the other books didn't hit on. So once I've got that goal, motivation, and conflict down for each of my characters, I go to the next phase. And this is setting up my beats. I cannot recommend enough that if you're going to write romance, you need to read and reread and maybe even get the audiobook and listen and re-listen to the book Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. My physical copy of this book is literally falling apart. I've used it so many times. I do own the audiobook as well because when I get stuck when I'm writing, one of the ways I get unstuck is to find the part of her audiobook where I'm stuck. The audiobook walks you through these phases that I'm about to walk you through, and these phases and beats are available all over the place online. I wouldn't steal content from her book to give you if it wasn't readily available, but this is readily available across the internet in a number of different ways, in blog posts and PDFs and spreadsheet beat sheets that people have given you to download. I still highly recommend the book. It's going to go a lot more in depth than what I'm going to go into here. And then, like I said, when I get stuck, I find the beat I'm stuck on in the audiobook and I'll listen to it while I'm walking the dog to get myself unstuck. All right, so I actually sit down and I map this out. I do it in a spreadsheet. I'm a spreadsheet kind of person. You don't have to do it that way, but I think in spreadsheets. And in fact, I'm going to show you one of my spreadsheets as we get towards the end here. But I start I start sort of at the beginning and I try to go through these beats and make myself little notes about what would make sense to happen in my story for each of these beats. So at the beginning, you're going to introduce your main characters. During this, you want to give your readers a look at their normal lives before it gets turned upside down by their goals and by their budding relationship with each other. So, for example, in Where We Belong, it starts with Chloe opening an email from the producer of this reality show, inviting her up to New York for the final round of casting. So we kind of drop in as she's already in the process of casting, but now she's made it to the final round and she's in her cafe, and we show her interacting with another woman who works in her cafe, also interacting with some people at the cafe, including her brother, where we sort of set up this idea that she's always lived in her brother's shadow. This book is part of a series, so some of that has already been set up in previous books, but I like each of mine to be a standalone, and so I'm giving a glimpse of that again in my introduction. I don't have Michael on the page at the very beginning. That doesn't have to happen in the first scene. In a lot of books, it does happen in the first chapter. Sometimes it doesn't happen until the second chapter, but it's going to be pretty early on in your book that you then are going to have the meet cute. This is the beat where your two main characters meet. Now, because mine is a series, they've already met in a previous book, actually, even before the first book in the series meets. So they already know each other. And if you were writing something like a second chance romance or a friends to lovers, they're not meeting for the very first time on the page, but there is a time where they both appear on the page together for the first time for the reader. So you're always going to have a meet cute, even if they've technically already met prior to this book starting. Okay, so this is the first time we're going to see them on the page together. This should be memorable in some way. We should start getting, as a reader, you should start sort of feeling why these two people might end up together or might be the right fit for one another. Then the next beat is no way number one. During this beat, one of your main characters should either think or say out loud why they will not be falling in love with the other person. For Michael, it's because Chloe's 10 years younger than him, and he's always kind of viewed her as a little sister. Obviously, that is going to start to change during this book, but my no way number one is going to be him sort of acknowledging that she is too young for him. Her no way is going to be she needs to focus on this competition. She wants to win this competition, and she cannot be distracted by this longtime crush that she has had on Michael. And then the end of phase one is going to be the adhesion of love plot thrust. So your main characters have been together on the page. They've each sworn essentially that they're not going to fall in love with each other. Fortunately for them and for all of us, the adhesion beat is going to be next. In this beat, something is going to happen to keep your main characters close to each other for the duration of the story. For mine, it's going to be Chloe needing Michael's help with some of the things for her audition and her first episode on this show, because she does not have a traditional business background and doesn't necessarily know all the stuff that she needs to do in order to impress these judges or meet these judges' expectations when it comes to running a business and the types of things you should know and keep track of and have paperwork for and that sort of thing. Then we're going to move into phase two, falling in love. During this phase, you are going to show your readers why your characters are absolutely meant to be. You're going to increase the tension between them, but you're also going to start to show why they're stronger together than they are apart. So we have a no way number two. Despite the fact that your characters are now stuck together, working on something together, or physically stuck in a place together, they're going to fight their feelings. And no way number two offers an opportunity for them to reiterate either out loud or in their minds why this relationship is never going to work. Then we have the inkling. This is where your characters start to realize they might actually fall in love. Maybe they see a different side of the other person, or there's some sort of romantic moment here. Then there's deepening desire. We can't deny it anymore. These characters are falling in love, and this beat is going to show them doing that and growing closer. Then we have maybe this could work. Your characters are going to start to believe that love could work. There's something different about this connection than anything they've experienced before. And then we hit the midpoint of love. Where there's smoke, there's fire. The sparks have been flying between the characters at this point, and the tension culminates in an expression of their affection. This could be a kiss, maybe more. Now, this is going to start to depend on the heat level that you write. My characters generally are not even kissing at this point. I write kisses only, no spice sort of romance. My kisses are usually towards the very end of the book, if not at the very end of the book. But in a spicier novel, this might be where they sleep together. So it sort of depends on the spice level of the romance. But here you do want there to be some sort of climactic moment in the story where they are sort of giving in and showing some sort of affection towards each other. Phase 3 is retreating from love. Okay, we would only have half of a book if we ended it at that midpoint sort of climax. So instead, here they're going to have some difficulties after this, romantic moment, kiss, passionate night together, whatever your spice level is. But these characters have internal issues they need to work through. We haven't worked through those yet. So during the third phase, they are going to experience some doubt that drives them apart. So inkling of doubt. After the high of sort of that connection they have at the midpoint, uncertainty is going to set in. They start letting their fears get the better of them. Then we go into deepening of doubt. Their insecurities are running high. Maybe they have a misunderstanding or they're driven apart for some reason. Whatever reason they had for not falling in love back in those no way beats, we're going to totally exploit that at this part of the book. Then there's retreat. It's becoming too much. They need to guard their hearts and stay safe. Misunderstanding usually continues here. There's some sort of pain in their connection. For some reason, they can't overcome their internal flaws to be together. And then it's shields up. Okay. Your characters trusted someone, but they were let down. During this beat, they reaffirm their commitment to hardening their hearts and being alone. And then it's the breakup. It's over. The breakup sometimes happens during the shields up moment, but it's permanent now, or is it? People will talk about the third act breakup. That's what we're talking about here. You do not have to have a third act breakup. In some of my books, this is either a misunderstanding or a fight. And in my book, If I'd Have Known, the characters have an argument, but they don't actually break up. They have an adult conversation. Some readers have really begun to fight back against the third act breakup, and they would rather just have that sort of a fight. It doesn't have to be like an ugly fight, but a disagreement, and then working through it like adults. So it just depends on the story as to whether you have an actual breakup here or not. All right, phase 3 ended with our characters broken up or struggling. We have to get them back together in phase 4. So in phase 4, they are going to overcome the internal flaws that kept them apart once and for all. But first, we got to get through Dark Night of the Soul. Your characters are going to wallow for a little bit after their breakup or their argument, fight, whatever it is. And they're going to wonder, how did things go so wrong for them again? Then there's the wake up. After some time in the darkness, things start to look brighter again. Your characters realize that they are choosing to be miserable and instead they can choose to be happy. They just need to address their flaws once and for all. There is often then a grand gesture. So this is the big moment. One of your characters is going to take a big risk to show the other one that they have changed and that love can indeed conquer all. Then we have wholehearted. It worked. Your characters are together. They have addressed what's been holding them each back, and they are ready for their happily ever after, or they're happy for now. And then romance quite often, almost always, has an epilogue where we give readers a sneak peek into the future. What does it look like now that they are living their lives together? For me, this usually either means an engagement or a wedding in the epilogue. After I've done my beat sheet, and when I do my beat sheet, I maybe have one sentence for each of those things. It might be a few sentences, but we're not talking about enormous amounts of text that I'm writing as I'm doing the beat sheet. I'm just sort of thinking through, how am I going to hit all of these points to get a complete story? So I'll try to write down an idea for each of the beats. And then I write my synopsis. This might sound bonkers. I've never even met another author who does this, I don't think. But for me, writing the synopsis first is like putting together essentially like an x-ray of my story. I can see that the bones are all there before I start writing. For me, being able to write the synopsis at this stage proves I have a full story, and I'm not going to get halfway through writing it and get stuck in the middle and not know where to go. I know so many people who have manuscripts that are 20,000 words, 30,000 words, that they got to that point and stopped and either lost their motivation or couldn't figure out where the story went from there. And that's why I prefer to be a plotter. I want to prove out that I can create a full book from this idea before I start investing the time in writing it. So for my synopsis, I'm shooting for 1 to 2 pages. If you're going to search for a literary agent and try to get a traditional publishing deal, some agents will require that this is only 1 page long. I'm an overwriter, so it's tough for me to write 1 page. I start with 2 pages, and then if I have to go back and start cutting it, I will cut it down to 1 later. But at this point, I'm going to shoot for 2 single spaced pages. You start with your core premise. So, who are the characters? What brings them together? And what's the central tension? And then, what does each of them want? Why do they want it? And what's standing in their way? This is that goal, motivation, conflict we talked about. And then I'm going to map out the major turning points, the meet cute, the tension, that midpoint shift, that all is dark sort of moment, and then the resolution. I'm going to make sure I have the emotional arc in there. How did they change from beginning to end, and why couldn't they be together before? I also want to show the central conflict really clearly. What keeps them apart for most of this story? You don't hide the ending in your synopsis. It's you're going to reveal you're happily ever after or you're happy for now. Just make sure that your synopsis stays focused on the romance. You may have subplots, like one of my subplots in Where We Belong is Chloe being on the reality show and whether she's going to win it or not. But the love story drives every beat, not the reality show. So once I've been able to write a full synopsis, then I feel confident that I can sit down and write the book because I've mapped it all out. I've got something to hit for all of the beats. I know that there is a full story here and that I'm going to be able to finish this novel when I sit down to write it. So this is what works for me. You're going to probably have to write a synopsis at some point. You may not decide to do it here where I do it, but for me, this is like proof of concept, if you're familiar with that in the business world. This proves to me that I have a full book and it's worth my time to now sit down and try to write it. Now, because I'm really a plotter, I will sit down and try to start mapping out a chapter breakdown. Honestly, this has gone better with me for some books than it has for others. And I'm going to show you the actual spreadsheet where I keep track of things once I start writing. But here's how I kind of break it down. I shoot for 80,000 words. So in romance with a traditional publisher, you want to be in the 75 to 90,000 range for a contemporary romance, which is what I write. I shoot for 80 because I know I'm likely to overwrite and get to 90, so I'm going to shoot for 80. So I write chapters, and this is something you would learn about yourself as you write. You probably don't know this in the beginning, but what I have found is I tend to write chapters of about 2,500 words. Some are going to be 3,000 to 3,500, some might be as low as 1,500, but largely I come in somewhere around that 2,500 space. Also, I tend to write about 2,500 words a day, so I tend to write a chapter a day. Yeah, that's not always true, but as I've written more books, that's sort of where I've ended up. So at 80,000 words, with 2,500 a chapter, I'm going to break that down into, I have about 32 chapters plus an epilogue. Each phase I just showed you is 25% of the book, so about 20,000 words. Okay, so this lets me start breaking down my chapters into those phases. Several phases, can happen in one chapter. You might have your introduction and your meet cute and the reason they are going to start spending time together. That might all come out in the first chapter, or it might take several chapters for that all to come out. So I start trying to very loosely sort of plan how those beats are going to break down into chapters, and that looks really different from one book to the next. It is a really loose guide, and I would say that I really only stick to the plan for probably the first few chapters, and then my characters start doing things I'm not expecting, and it throws off the rest of the chapters, and I have to rework them. So my chapter breakdown is very loose. I update it constantly while I'm drafting my book, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Actually, it's my very next slide. So I have something I call a book Bible. I found this spreadsheet from someone else and then sort of adapted it for my own use. So I want to show you ultimately what that Excel spreadsheet ends up looking like. So I'm going to switch screens and show you that right here. And there you have it. That is how I plan out my romance books before I sit down to write them. I have completed now, I think it's 7 novels, some of which are out and some of which are not. I think at the time of this recording, I have 4 out with my traditional publisher, plus 1 and a novella out on my own. And I've got another traditional coming out this year, as well as 2 self-published books, which I'm actually in the process of writing. So this process is what I use. Again, take from it what's useful for you, ditch what isn't. You're going to hear from a lot of different authors about their process, and what works for one person does not necessarily work for another person. Do not beat yourself up if my process doesn't work for you. I will say, however, that the romancing the beat, those beats I went through from Gwen Hayes, that's pretty universal. If you read widely in this genre, most books pretty closely follow that formula. So if you take nothing else from this, I would grab that book and refer to it frequently. Even with how many books I've written now, I still go back to it all the time. And like I said, I have the audiobook version so that when I get stuck and a beat isn't working, I will go listen to her chapter on that beat, and that usually kind of helps me get unstuck. So I hope you found this helpful. Please reach out if I can answer questions or help you with anything. I've got my email address and my social media handle here for you. Would love to hear from you, and just absolutely wish you the best of luck if you have decided to write romance.